All right, thanks for joining us. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about why adopt instructional materials created by argument-driven inquiry. The reason I want to talk to you about this is the fact that when we have new TEKs, we have an opportunity to make major change in your district. And when we have a proclamation that's associated with those changes, we also have the resources and the funding that you need to make those changes happen. So when you're trying to decide if you want to make a big change in your district or not, I think your decision comes down to really four key questions. The first one is, what kind of learning experiences do you want the students in your districts to have in science? The second one is, will the instructional materials you adopt make it possible to provide those experiences? The third is, will the teachers in your district find the instructional materials helpful and easy to use? And are the assessments included in the materials aligned with your vision of how assessment should be used in science? So what I wanted to do today is take a little bit of time to tackle these four questions and help you, provide you some information so you can make an informed decision based on these questions around argument-driven inquiry instructional materials. So let's start off with the first one. What kinds of learning experience do you want a student to have in your district to have? What kind of learning experiences do you want the students in your district to have in science? When we think about learning experiences, we think of moving the nature of instruction, teaching and learning to the ideas that are on the right side of this table. So we're hoping that learning experiences look more like students figuring out phenomenon, three-dimensional learning with the goal of developing explanations or solutions, student sense making, learning and doing science as being the same activity, students' choice, having choice about what counts as knowing or what counts as high quality, and then students reading, talking, and writing to evaluate and communicate information. And we're hoping that it looks less like the items on the left side, where students are only learning about concepts and terms, or there's just a presentation of concept sequence from concrete to representational to abstract. Lessons more following that I do, we do, kind of activity structure, or learning and doing science as separate activities. So when we think about this, what we've been trying to do is design our instructional materials so they look like they provide experiences that look more on the right and the left. So if you agree with these kinds of things that you want on the right side with us on that, we can continue on and I'll show you some more of these ideas. Okay. So if you're hoping for that kind of shift or change in your district, or just seeing that kind of learning activity happening, the next big question is, will the instructional materials you adopt make it possible to provide those experiences? And the reason we bring that up is instructional materials really provide a tool to make certain kinds of things happen. And instructional materials are always designed around to kind of have a certain kinds of activity happen, or certain kinds of learning, or certain kind of experiences. And the choice of those instructional materials really kind of either promote a certain type of teaching and learning or really constrain it. For example, if your goal is to give students opportunities to figure out phenomenon, it's really hard to do that when students are only learning about concepts or terms with the instructional materials, right? So these are lots of examples of things that are out there that really have more of a conceptual focus, right? Or more of a focus on kids developing vocabulary. Nothing necessarily wrong with these materials, they just have a different focus, right? That's not very helpful when you're asking kids to figure out phenomenon using these kinds of materials. It's also hard to give students opportunities to develop explanations using the three dimensions of science when most lessons follow a very structured format of presenting concepts from concrete to representational to abstract. And you can kind of see some of these activities are designed to do that, of like, here is a concrete example of this, then we're going to move to representational, and then we have some kind of abstract activity where you can see over there, or an activity to promote abstraction. It's also hard to encourage student sense making, which is them figuring out the world around them, if lessons are following an I do, we do, you do activity structure. And that tends to be, these activities tend to be structured so students get to the right answer or don't make a mistake when they're working on things, right? So here's some examples of what some activities might look like when they're kind of following the structure of telling kids what they should do and then what they should learn from those. really doesn't promote sense making in any way. It's also hard to give students more opportunities to learn by doing when doing science and learning are always separate activities, right? So a lot of materials focus on concepts first and the practices and recurring themes of science as separate and or after, right? So here's some examples of that where you've got kids reading about science, learning, looking at models that are prepared by somebody else to learn about science, or doing activities where they're trying to not engage in the practices of science to figure out something, but rather just to start looking at how you can use science ideas in fun and creative ways. It's also hard to give students opportunity to decide what counts as knowing and learning when students are only given choice about what assignments or activities complete. We're seeing more and more opportunities for kids to have choice in the assignments that they do, in which order, how they demonstrate their learning, how do they figure out how they decide to learn about some kind of content. However, that really doesn't give kids opportunities to really know, in the context of science, how do we know one explanation is more valid or acceptable or another? What do scientists go about to generate these explanations? Why can we be sure about these explanations or models, theories, and laws that we are teaching kids about in the first place? How do we know when something is high quality other than providing a rubric or provided directions from a teacher or putting things in the right spot? How do kids get to decide what makes something better than another, right? And without having those kinds of ideas, it makes it really hard to move across context and really decide when you're working on your own how things should look, or what counts as done, or what counts as knowing. It's also hard to give students opportunities to read, talk, and write in the service of sense making when the materials require them to watch videos or read text. I've already mentioned how a lot of materials are built around watching someone do science, or reading about the outcomes of science, or reading about the findings of science. And many of these kinds of activities that are built into existing instructional materials are exactly done to do that. They're really not asking kids to say, hey, there's some things that you don't know, or there are some things that we're trying to figure out. What information would be helpful for you to do that? Or enabling kids to go look for those kinds of things is more of, read this and then answer these questions so I can make sure that you have the right answer. Or watch this video and make sure that we'll pause at certain spots so you can answer the question about this, to make sure you're paying attention, right? So it's really hard to give those opportunities for sense making and using literacy in a meaningful way when instructional materials are set up this way. So we bring this up because ADI instructional materials look completely different, right? And it's intentional because we're trying to make these moves to that right side of the table that I was showing you, where kids are figuring out things using the 3 dimensions of science. So what I wanted to do real quick is kind of give you a demonstration of what ADI instructional materials look like. What I'm going to do is just show you a version that's kind of a paper-based, where kids could be using handouts and hands-on materials. And then later on, we'll talk about how variations of that on that central theme or the central example can work. Okay, so let's get started. When you look at ADI lessons, they're all investigations, and they all follow this instructional model that we call argument-driven inquiry, and that's why we call our materials argument-driven inquiry to begin with. So with this instructional model, there's these 7 stages of activities, and these are not really for kids to know, but these are for us as teachers to understand what our goal is in instruction, what's coming down the pipeline, where do we need the kids to be at, and how all these things fit together in ways. Now, you will not see this instructional model in anybody else's materials because it is something that we have developed over time through research. So you'll often hear lots of people talk about their instructional materials being research-based, which means that you go look at the findings of research and look at good things that you can do to help kids learn. And then you try to get as many of those good things happening at any one time. Our approach has been completely different, is looking at how can we design instructional models from the ground up through research that gives kids an opportunity to figure out the world around them using the dimensions of science. And because of that, we've been doing this research for over 10 years, testing it in classrooms with teachers, refining our instructional approach, refining our models, and there's just been tons of research that examines and documents these kinds of studies. So if you do a Google Scholar search real quick for argument-driven inquiry, you'll see literally hundreds of studies of people that have been conducted all over the world in different grade levels and different contexts, looking at how to support students learning using this instructional approach. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about what this ends up looking like, right? So any ADI investigation starts with a task, right? So the introduction of a task, and what this looks like here is ends up looking like this. So we have this investigation called pushing a magnet with a magnet, and this is for third graders. And it ends up with introducing a phenomenon. So usually we'll have a little bit of text to start off with. This is something a teacher can read aloud, and it starts something like this. Magnets are very useful. We can use a magnet to pull objects that contain iron closer to us without touching them. We can also use magnets to hold things in place because the force of a magnet can travel through objects. For example, we can use a magnet to hold a piece of paper in a refrigerator. Magnets can also move other magnets. Take a moment to watch what happens when one magnet is placed near another magnet. Keep track of what you notice and wonder about in the boxes below. So let me show you the video here that then we would show kids about magnets. So then we have kids write down things that they notice and they wonder about. And what always starts coming up is they start talking about the direction. Sometimes magnets attract, sometimes they repel. And they start talking about, well, sometimes when you bring them close, they move further away from each other, and by a lot, and sometimes by a little. Once you have those kinds of questions going, then we introduce the task around that phenomenon. And in this case, we ask them, how does changing the distance between two magnets affect the pushing force strength between them? From there, we ask kids to kind of start thinking about that and how they would answer that question, why they think it's going on, and have them develop these initial models. At the elementary grades, we usually just describe it as a picture about your ideas. But we have kids individually then draw this out of like what they think is going on. Why do magnets move away from each other more or less? They then share those ideas with the other kids in their groups. And from there, they start sharing their past experiences with magnets, bring up all these ideas, but they get really curious about things they do not understand yet, and things that they don't understand, or they lack the information they need to be able to answer that bigger question. So from there, what we do is we ask kids to start thinking about, well, what are the questions that you really have? What are the things that you would like to know more about that would help us figure out this phenomenon that we just saw? From there, when they have all these questions, it's perfect to then move into what we call stage 2 ideas, is where we introduce science ideas. How we do that is we'll have a couple of short readings, and what we do is we organize these around the core ideas, or the disciplinary content and the recurring themes, and in some cases the practices. So for example, the first reading they would have is really about disciplinary content, the idea of magnetic forces, right? And how magnetic poles work. Right, so this is content they would have learned or been covered in second grade, but in this case, it's brought back up so they can re-spiral into that and be refreshed on what has been going on. Then we introduce the idea of how do you measure a pushing force then if two magnets can repel. This gets the idea of practices around designing and carrying out investigation. And the idea here is not to tell them how to carry out the investigation, but help them think about some ways that they could go about using some ideas about measurement in those investigations. And then finally, we talk about a recurring theme, in this case, cause and effect. What is the cause of this? How do you go about figuring that out in this situation? Now, you notice these readings are not set up as here's a reading and here's some analysis questions for you to answer. And that's back to that point of we really want kids to decide what's important and look for information that'll be helpful based on things they don't know. So it's less about us telling them what they should learn to what's going to be helpful for them figuring things out. So what often teachers will do is just kind of read these out loud, show the pictures, and then in their group, small groups, have kids start talking about what were the things that were really important or were useful. Then each group shares out ideas, and then the teacher can write those onto an anchor chart and make sure everybody has those shared ideas. So these become the kind of the foundation that kids can use to carry out their investigation. Which brings us to the next stage, which we call plan. So from here, they're definitely going to be missing some information. The readings that we provide them do not give the answer to the guiding question. You can think of them as kind of pieces of a puzzle, right? So we've laid out pieces of puzzles on a desk, and now they're trying to figure out how these all fit together, but they're going to notice they're missing some pieces. That's where they design and carry out their investigation to fill in those gaps. To help them plan out their investigation, we use these graphic organizers. We have lots of different versions, but it's basically designed to draw kids' attention to what question you're trying to answer, what data that you need to get, your observations, your measurements, how you're going to go about getting those observations and measurements, and then what are you going to do with that information once you have it. You'll notice on the bottom there's a place for a teacher signature. We use that as a formative assessment, so teachers can go around, check in, provide advice, reteach necessary, bring up something the kids haven't been thinking about at that place. And you see a picture of the kids working on that in their group. Really rich conversations about what they're doing and why they're going about doing it. Here's a picture of an example of a proposal or investigation plan written out by elementary school kids. You can see they don't have to be overly detailed, but the idea is just to get kids to start thinking about this. They don't all have to be the same. Actually, it's better if most kids are doing kind of different things, but you can kind of see how kids are planning these out. And the importance, we also include a spot for kids to draw pictures because that helps them think through what they're going to be doing and what's going on. Once they have their plans, they go ahead and carry those out. So we call this the do stage. In this case of this investigation, kids will be using cylinder magnets, and they can put them in the groove of a ruler. They can bring them closer or further from each other and then let go, and then measure how far they move as a way to start thinking about magnetic field strength. As they're doing that, we have kits all set up and things like that for the students that have all the materials they need. So each group would then get a ruler, these cylinder magnets, and then we actually have little stickers that go into the middle of the ruler to allow the magnets to slide easier, not get caught in grooves. As they're working, we once again have supports for them to record what they observe or measure. We use that, make that pretty open. It's up to you how they write that down. They may draw pictures, they may write down numbers, they write down measurements. Usually it's not too organized at this point. So then we ask kids from that way to, okay, how do you go ahead and make sense of your data, right? So those observations and measurements, can you make comparisons? Can you look for trends, show a relationship? And start thinking about ways to represent that. And then we give them another kind of open-ended scaffold here to allow them, if they choose to make a data table, for example, or maybe a graph, it makes it a little bit easier for that to happen. But the idea is that they have to organize and make sense of the data they're doing. It's a great opportunity to bring in mathematics at this time as well, for two reasons. One, that's a practice of science and the TEKS, and also it helps support their mathematical learning. And then those cross-disciplinary connections. So at the end of stage 4, they've made sense of the data, and they should have an answer to the guiding question at this point that they're all trying to work on. But since each group was working on their own, they may have different answers, and they may have different reasons for those answers. So what we ask them to do is share what they figured out during the 5th stage. And to have them do that, we have them create arguments, and we recommend having them do these on whiteboards that are about 2 foot by 3 foot in size. The reason we have kids do these on whiteboards is because it makes it easier to change. Often if we have kids create things on paper, they won't change it after they've learned something new. So what we're really hoping here is that as kids write these down, they're willing to change ideas, think of these as rough drafts, a starting point that they can refine. And you can see the kind of the pieces that we ask kids to put into these arguments here. So we ask them to, like, what's the question you're trying to answer? Your claim, which is your answer to that question. Your evidence then is the analysis of data, not just the raw data, and then an interpretation of that evidence, or that analysis. So what does that mean? So if I make a bar graph showing the distance magnets move and the distance between the magnets, what is that graph actually showing me? And then finally, we ask them to include a justification of the evidence, and that is why that evidence is important. So that goes back to the original ideas that we shared with them of the disciplinary content and the recurring themes and the practices, if they read about that as well, helps them understand. So one of the key ideas that was pulled out of that was that an object will move more when more force is applied to it, which is a key fundamental idea to be able to make any of these connections about magnetic force, strength, and the movement of magnets. On the right side, there's another example done by a different group in the same class. You can see that they start adding different things. They can see the variation in their investigations and the data that they collected and how they're making sense of it. But you'll start seeing trends over time on this. Now, when kids first make their whiteboards, first time they're doing an ADI investigation, or even just the first round of making an argument during an investigation, they're not going to look as good as this. So what we do is we have kids share out their ideas. So here's a picture of a class doing that, and this is kind of a modified gallery walk format where you have a couple of students from each group staying put, and they kind of share what their argument is, what they did, and what they figured out, while other group members go to other stations one at a time, listen, offer advice. What we're really hoping to do here is not to say which one's the best or who's right or who's wrong, but really get them into the idea that everybody can improve in some ways. So if you're presenting these arguments, you're directed to write down suggestions for improvement or things that you can fix. And if you're traveling to other groups, you're directed to not only provide feedback to other folks, but if you see a really good idea, bring that back to your team and that you can do to revise these. So after they go through a couple of different rotations here, they actually have a chance to go back to their board, revise it, make it better based on what they've talked about. There's a number of ways to do that. So you can have kids doing kind of a modified gallery walk where they're doing that, where they're talking directly. You can have kids, each team set up their board, and then each group goes around with sticky notes to offer feedback. And you can do color-coded sticky notes where you've got, like, say, blue is for questions, green is for a glow, a yellow is for a suggestion for improvement, right? And you can see how these kids start talking through that and offering things that they can talk about or change to make their argument stronger or more clear. You can even do it computer-based. In this class, these students like to use Google Docs, so they put together their argument like that, and then they left an iPad and then dropped sticky notes for advice as they're going through this. The format really does not matter, or how they give each other feedback. The key is that they give each other feedback and then they go and revise their arguments at the end of that step. So at the end of the step, they should have all a pretty good, strong argument, and they all should be pretty similar at that point because the best ideas bubble to the top. So the teacher at this point then holds what we call or goes into the reflect stage and holds what we call a reflective discussion. And the idea during this reflective discussion, you want to talk about two things. The first thing you want to is, as a class, talk about the ideas that they were using. So not the answer to the guiding question of the investigation, but really talk about the ideas that they were using during the investigation to make sense of the phenomenon. So in this case, for this investigation, we might show a picture like this talking about the different poles of magnets, and then ask them to explain in their groups, what they think will happen in each of these scenarios, right? They can share out, kids can agree or disagree, and then you as a teacher can then have a real opportunity to correct any misconceptions, offer any other things, reteach as necessary, right? So this kind of whole class tie together is really important and a key stage in the ADI instructional model. We also recommend that you spend this time talking about how to engage in science practices in ways that are more useful in the future. How we usually do that is recommending around just 3 basic questions. What did your group do during the investigation was helpful? So groups will share that out and give them a compliment on how well they did. Then you ask them what their group did that wasn't so helpful for figuring out that phenomenon, and they start kind of discussing the things that, well, we didn't write any things down, or we only tested one thing. And then as a class, you ask them what we should do next time to conduct the best investigation possible, right? So what are the things, if we're going to carry out another investigation, what should we do? And this is a really powerful learning moment for learning how to engage in the practices of science. Kids will make mistakes. Fantastic. Mistakes are opportunities to learn. It's also a time for kids to reflect on practice. So much like if you're an artist or in a band or playing a sport, you try things out, make mistakes, reflect on those mistakes, and make a plan for going forward. And you do that over and over again until you get better and better and better. It's the same idea about how you learn how to do science. So you're giving kids opportunities to try things out, see if they work or not, and then make a plan going forward is really powerful for their learning. Also, it's a time to talk about class norms, right? How are kids interacting with each other? How are they helpful to each other? How are they communicating, right? So you can set up times to talk about norms like this, and we've put together posters and things like that for teachers to kind of help guide those conversations. But these kind of reflective moments are really, really powerful for helping kids understand why we do what we do in science. The last stage, we call this report. So kids have been working either in small groups or in a whole class format at this point. So what we now ask them to do is individually share in writing what they figured out. And the reason we ask kids to do writing, to spend some time writing and sharing what they know and how they know it, is because there's a clear link between individual learning and the opportunity to explain in writing, right? So when you have classes of kids talking about an idea may bubble up, but individuals may not share that same idea as the consensus view of this. So the idea here is to give kids an opportunity to start thinking about what they know and how they know it. And through that writing process, it starts clarifying their own thinking and firms up their understanding of the concepts and what they were doing. To support that, we have them do a draft report first. We use these sentence starters to get them started, and it's not a long one. It's really just a piece of paper. So 2 sides. You begin with an introduction of what were you trying to figure out, and what was your question. Then you ask them their method, which is what did you do to figure this out? And then their argument. And the kids can pull all of this information from those handouts they were using before. So the introduction becomes from the task stage, the method comes from their plan stage, and their argument then comes from their do stage, and then the final whiteboard that they were sharing during the share stage, right? But the important thing is they on their own have to share what they learned and what they figured out. From there, we actually have kids, the teacher collects all of the reports written by the individual students. We recommend then the kids are paired up into pairs, and the teacher then gives each pair a report and a peer review guide, right? So the report's written by somebody else, and then you give the kids about 20 minutes to read over the report and then fill out this peer review guide. And after the end of the 20 minutes or so, you collect the first round reports and peer review guides, and then give each group a second report and a second peer review guide for them to fill out as a team. And the idea behind this, it gives kids a chance to talk about or to read different examples of report written for the same purpose. So see examples. 2, the peer review guide encourages them to start thinking about what counts, right? So the questions on here, and I'll show you another version of that, are a little bit bigger so you can see it, are designed to get kids to think about what counts, right? So is the answer to the guiding question correct? So instead of looking for the answer that's provided to them, is like, do you think it's correct? Or do you think it actually answers the question, right? Because sometimes it doesn't. What about the analysis? Did they do that correctly? Or do you find errors in that? Does the interpretation of that analysis make sense? Is it even there? Is there enough evidence to support the claim? And as over time, as they do this over and over again, they start developing a grasp of practice that allows them to really use these science practices and ideas in more rigorous and unique ways as different kinds of things come up. So what each group will do is they'll give it a rating of no, somewhat, yes. Notice there's no points assigned to that, and then they have to give feedback. Once the feedback's there, is the third part of the benefits of the peer review is asking kids to actually get actionable feedback and things they can change to make their report better. These all then go back to the original author, so they get their peer review guide, their report, then they can do a final draft, then that goes back into the teacher. The teacher can score it and then use it for a grade and offer comments about what is happening from there. So normally I would stop for questions about this lessons, but since we're just having a video here right now, what I hope to see is you can kind of get a flavor of what's going on in these investigations and how they look. So the next big question that I want us to grapple with is, will teachers in your district find the instructional materials helpful and easy to use? So that is a very, very interesting question of when you're thinking about usability. So if you have this vision for learning experiences, if you use these materials that are designed to have those learning experience, what about the use of those? So one of the things that we have done is, in addition to having just a teacher manual or teacher guide or teacher notes associated with this, we've built a digital platform that makes it easier for teachers to be able to use these instructional materials. And I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen here and show you what that looks like. All right, so now we are sharing. Whoops, I got to stop this presentation. There we go. So I'm now sharing this part of this. So this is what we call the ADI Learning Hub. I'm in here with a teacher account, so you can kind of see what this ends up looking like. When you access this as a teacher, you'll have your profile here where you can add your name, change your email, your password, and all that kind of stuff. You can also add tags. So if a student's an emerging multilingual student or has an IEP or a 504, you can make tags for that and mark those students. Now the kids don't see those tags, but it's helpful for you. There's also a chat feature in the system that allows you to interact with your students, so they can send you a message or you can send a message right in the system. There's also notifications that are tied to things that happen or events. So if a kid submit a report, it'll let you know that. If they have a question and they get stuck, it'll bring that up, and then you can click right on that and see what's going on. I'm going to go back to the dashboard right here. So the dashboard's set up around classes. So you can create multiple different classes, which is super useful if you're kind of departmentalized, right? So you can have different versions of this or just one single class. Within that dashboard there, for that class, you can see the characteristics of who's in there. You can then also make class announcements by just clicking on that button that goes to kids. You can assign new investigations, and you can assign assessments, we'll talk a little bit about later. You can also see all of your students, so you can add their tags, what's active, they're working on. We actually can assign them to different groups in there by just clicking on manage groups, and you can move kids around to any group that you want to do on that to kind of reflect what they're doing inside class. Also, I want to show you here what's called our lesson library. So you can go here to your lesson library. If you go to this one where it's the Texas edition from the adoptions, you can bring up all of these there. Then you can see the TEKS they're aligned to. You can filter them by grades. So let's do, say, a 4th grade one here. You can see what they're all doing there. And then if you're like, hey, I would like to do this one on traits of parents and offspring. If you view that investigation, it gives you an overview of what's going on. You can also do a quick preview and see what the investigation looks like. So you can change the modes on this. It's deactivated for this demonstration, but you can change this between in-person and remote. You can go to any stage in the investigation. These are the activities within that stage, right? And then what's really cool, I think, is then you have your teacher notes right here on the page. So as a teacher, you don't have to go through this gigantic book and bookmark all of these things. It's just there as you need it. And we also include teacher tips for helping support student learning during this stage of that. What's also nice is once you've assigned one of these investigations, then you can also enter a presentation mode, and you can show this on your screen like this and guide students through this whole process so they can see exactly what's going on. And then just to get out of that from there. Let me go back to our dashboard, show you a little bit about that. So when you have a class here in your master dashboard, you can see all of your investigations, and then you can go by individual classes to see which ones are assigned to that one. So for example, I've got these investigations that have been assigned. So what I'm going to do is look at the summary of that. And you can see that that's already been done because it's ended when I set this a little while ago, but you can see kind of an overview of what group students were doing, their score that were assigned, their feedback, score from different students. You can view their final report and offer grades for it. I haven't done all of that just because this is a kind of a demo kind of activity. You can also get all of your handouts from here. So you can get letters home, standards alignment. You can download all of the materials you need for them. So you can choose to use those materials or not if you're doing it paper-based. You can do the presentation mode like which I showed you before. Right, so that's really nice to be able to change that size of that. And you can do those different presentation size and move between those different ones. Once again, the teacher notes are all there. And then you can also view submissions, right? So anywhere for any individual student, you can go to anywhere they were and see what they have done for a various stage. And you can see all of their work and all of those pieces. So it makes it very easy for teachers to be able to use these different kinds of things. The edit investigation button allows you to change parameters, like if you want to move it from a due date or change a mode from in-person to remote so they can do it at home. You can do it that way. You can also download all students' works, their grades as a CSV file if you need that, as well as all their submissions. So you can get everything out of here very easily if you need that. So that kind of gives an overview of this idea of how we try to make this tool as helpful as possible to make it easy for teachers to deliver instruction in this manner. So what I'm going to do is go back here and kind of talk a little bit more about why ADI piece of this. So when we're looking at this, the next big question that we have is, are the assessments included in the materials aligned with your vision of how assessment should be used in science? And you'll see all instructional materials have assessments included. They can't be adopted through the state of Texas without them. The problem is most assessments really focus on concepts and terms, only really one dimension of what's going on. So lots of on vocabulary, lots of different kinds of formats to do that, but it's really just testing kids' understanding of concepts. So for us here at ADI, we're trying to make assessments look different, just like our instructional models, and be more aligned with that vision of kids figuring out things and being able to use the three-dimension of science to figure things out. So what we design our assessments to look more like about is having questions about real and interesting phenomenon. We target the ability to use a DCI and a cross-cutting concept, disciplinary content or disciplinary core ideas, what's DCI, and then the science and engineering practice. We're always asking for answers and reasons, not just answers. We're always trying to make student thinking visible and provide students with feedback that can support their learning versus just kind of focusing on one dimension, asking for answers, using assessment as a way to motivate or group or grade students. We're really looking at ways to help kids learn through assessment with our program here. So what we've done is designed our assessments to be aligned with that vision of teaching and learning. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you what that looks like back into our system. Actually, take that back, I'm going to first show you some paper versions of that. So here's some example of what our assessments end up looking like. So paper version of this, here's one we call polar bears and black bears in Alaska. What we always do is we introduce a phenomenon of some kind. All right, so in this case, there's polar bears and black bears found in Alaska, but these bears don't they don't have the same traits, and they don't live in the same location. So a biologist has made a claim that polar bears and black bears live in different parts of Alaska because they have different traits, and specifically black bears do not have traits that enable to survive in areas covered by ice. Then we ask students to use the 3 dimensions of science, in this case, disciplinary content, adaptations, current themes, cause and effect, and practice argument from evidence to answer the next set of questions. So we asked them to say, okay, based on the traits of the polar bear and black bear, what kinds of comparisons between those two kinds of animals could be used as evidence to support the biologist's claims, and then what could be used to challenge. And then from there, we asked them to explain why they shaped those things that way. Another example is this one. This is called 2-cylinder magnets on track. It's very related to the investigation I showed you. But this case, we actually include a video in that. So I'll show you what that looks like. I ask kids to watch this video first. And then from there, we ask them to use their ideas about magnetism, non-contact forces, and cause and effect relationships to predict the paramagnets that will move the greatest distance away from each other when they're brought together, and then ask them why. Here's a final one, focusing more on models. So we'll show an image or a video of a car in a mirror that you can't see into the last kind of second here. Because it's around that. We introduced where that person was standing in a mirror and the car's location of the model. Then we asked them about what they know about light and models to identify the model that best explains why you can see how light travels between the car and the person, and then explain their thinking about that. So the assessments are designed to look very different. But once again, we want them not only to ask kids about using these 3 dimensions of science, but we also want them to be useful for promoting and supporting learning for both teachers and for students. And let me show you how we go about doing that. So I'm going to share here the ADI Learning Hub. And what we've done is in there, we've also included an assessment library. So you can see this here. So when you go to assessments, we can also have, in addition to lessons and investigations, we have assessments around those different TEKs. So we can go here and look at this. And as you can see here, we've got various assessments that are all in the system, all tied to different TEKs that they target. It tells you what kind of assessments they're looking at, like in terms of format, about how long it would take to decide. And you can preview what these then look like. So in this case, this one's 5 parts because it's a summative assessment designed to go at the end of the unit. So you can see where we have videos embedded in there. They have questions. It shows you what's the right answer and then what the kids will be explaining. And you can see in each of those parts. And now they move from there, and they all have different kinds of items in there that's similar to the new STAR test. I'm going to go back, so you can assign that to one of your classes, and then the kids can take that online. When they do that, it makes it super useful for you as a teacher and for the students to get information. So I went back to my dashboard here, and we can see some of our finished assessments. So I'm going to show you the digital version of that 2-cylinder magnets on a track that I just showed you. So when you open that, you're able to see the dashboard. And what's nice about this is you can download the handouts, the materials, which would be the handouts. You can also download students' grades once they've been scored. You can set various settings here where you can change the mode from paperless to which would be doing it online, or paper-based, which is the one I showed you there. If it's paperless, you can have kids edit after they submit. You can have them do multiple resubmissions. You can change open dates, open times, close times for each individual student. You can see when they've completed them. You can also view the assessment. So we have these options here where we have a presentation mode. The presentation mode is if you're using this paperless, excuse me, once again, you can show this to the class and then they can see the video and then answer the questions on their handouts. So that's super useful. It also has your teacher notes here, so you can see the answers and what it's designed to target. And I'm going to go back here in my dashboard. I can also use view responses, so I can see every student's individual response to this. So I can look at student, I don't know, 2 here. And then I can look through and see, okay, they answered this answer, and that's the reason they gave there. Then I can also grade that assessment from here, or I can do it back from the dashboard. Now, what's very cool about what we've done here is we can also include a summary. Now, one of the most important things that we can do as teachers is look for patterns in kids' answers, so we can figure out ways to help support them if they did not get the correct answer in that case. So in this case, this system automatically does this for us is if the students, that tells us 48% of our students in this class picked this answer here, which is the correct one, but it gives them all of their reasons. So now that I can look for if they're actually answering the question for reasons of using the core ideas versus just guessing. And then I can also look at these different various options here and see what patterns I see of why all these students chose this answer instead of other ones. Really powerful for reteaching and formative kinds of assessment. So I'm going to go back to that one. Sorry, I clicked the button to go back to the main page there. Also, what we can do for any student is we can grade their assessment. Oh, I already graded that one. So let me do one that hasn't been graded yet. So when I do that and I click on that student, it brings up this information here. And what I can do is provide students with feedback, a score, or feedback only. So I can click on any of those. I can give the assessment score already. So if I'm adding that to my grade book, it's already been chosen for me, so I know if they got it right or wrong, so that would be incorrect. And then I can read the reason and give it a correct, partially correct or incorrect. And then I can give actionable feedback to the kids. Now, I don't have this booted up here, but what ends up the kids are able to see at that point is once it's graded, they have their own dashboard and they'll see their score if you enable the score feature, or they'll just say, look at your feedback, and they'll have a button where it'll bring up the kids' feedback on that. And if you set it so you have more than one submission, you're able to actually have kids, after they've read their feedback, they can resubmit at that point based on that feedback. So once again, as we said, this is designed to make it as useful for you as a teacher to support learning and make it as easy as possible for students to learn from assessments, not just seeing assessments as, well, I thought I knew that, but I guess not, right? So having this kind of as a mechanism in there to help kids learn and teachers teach is really, really important to us. All right, to kind of wrap up here now, let me go back to sharing this final screen. Whoops, wrong one. So to kind of wrap up that, that's kind of the big questions that we have is thinking about why we do what we do in the classroom and moving those kinds of materials to make those kinds of visions that you want inside your classroom to be a reality. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was helpful in making a decision for you.